are we living in a time of austerity? Even though that seems very extreme, we're not in a time of war, we're not really in a time where rations are being presented. Um, I think that we are heading in that way, and I just thought I'll present the case for why that is. And to do that, perhaps the important thing is to just look at history, to look at what it was like in Victorian England, and compare it with what we have now. So let's just do that. So firstly, before we jump in, let's just set the scene for where we are today and what things feel like. So if we cast our minds back to the 1980s and 1990s, if we think about the median household income and we have it as a ratio of what are the essentials versus what are like the other things that we may spend on, maybe we save money and so on, it would look something like this. So in the 50%, you'll have your groceries, you have your rent, and your and so on. If we fast forward to today, it's no longer 50% of our household income. It's more like 65%, 60 to 65%. So which means that we have 15% less space for this breathing room that we might have. Like, let's say if we have a job loss or anything like that, that may eat up into like our safety net that we may need, or maybe if we want a holiday or so on, it eats up into this space. So that's the change that we can see in the last 30 odd years. Now, for the Victorian working class, this was far more severe, right? They lived in a time of austerity. They lived in a time where it was very, very dire. And they would have a breathing room that is 15 to 30%. In their situation, their total essentials is like 70 to 85% of their total take-home salary. Now, we're not that far away, right? Like if we just look at the headline numbers, 70 to 85, we're currently trending 60 to 65. This is a little bit more, and it will really start to feel the pinch. Now, if we look at the middle class Victorian, the middle class in Victorian England times, the ratio probably looked a bit more like this. So this probably resembles a little bit more of what it felt like in the 80s and 90s, where there was far more breathing room. There was room to go on holidays and many other things. And I think like this shows the dichotomy that we see, if I was to relate it to today's world, of where people look at when they like reflect back on like the 80s and 90s versus the times today. It's like, oh, you're basically comparing middle class, in the Victorian middle class to the Victorian working class. So let's just overlay it and just talk at a high level some of the differences back then versus what we have today. Now, if we look at the ratios, of course, we as I mentioned, we're trending in a particular way, but the ratios of where and how people spend money is very, very different. Like for one, probably the most noticeable one that we can see is the food burden section. Nowadays, with the advent of technology, we have fridges. There are also much better agricultural ways of like growing agriculture. There's also logistics for importing and exporting goods, which means that the price of food is far, far lower, or at least as a share is far, far lower. But I think that this is kind of offset in recent times, at least particularly in Australia, with, of course, house prices. So we can look at this in how the median price to income ratio for houses worldwide it's like 5x, but in countries or in cities in Australia like Sydney or Melbourne, it's much, much higher. It's probably like 9-10x compared with the median income. In fact, I think median income in Australia is around 100k. House prices have definitely the median house prices definitely hit 1 million in Australian dollars. So that is like one thing that has definitely changed from the 1980s, whereas wages, it's pretty flat, relatively speaking. So what does this mean? This means that the change, if we just look in the last 20 years, so we're not going all the way back to the 90s and 80s, it looks something like this. We can see that house prices is just continue to take a larger and larger share of the average median income, whereas as a share of our income, the basket of goods, like food, transport, and so on, is relatively flat. And that in itself is a massive problem that we have. Now you might be thinking to yourself, well, is this really true? This bottom bit, like the housing basket with food and transport and so on. And I think one thing many people have experienced in the last 5 years, especially post-COVID, is just the massive increase in grocery prices, and this is not a big surprise, or it shouldn't be a surprise to anyone. But what we see now is that we are getting squeezed from both sides, both the grocery price side, and also the housing side, and that's the issue that we have in modern day, right? And I think that this accounts for this feeling that things are getting out of control. Because it's like one thing if house prices go up and you're like, okay, it's a house price, it's just something that maybe you save up for, and it's just a one-off large purchase. But when grocery prices start rising, it really starts to hurt. With all that in mind, what is it that I'm trying to say? I'm trying to say that this feeling of we compare with when we look back in time has a lot of echoes to Victorian England times. We look back at maybe the 80s and 90s, and it's kind of reflective of Victorian middle class, whereas I think the average person today, the average working class, really it's moving towards the Victorian working class situation, where we are getting screwed on both sides, housing, groceries, and so on. And it's getting to the point where, well, I do believe we're in a time of austerity.